Over 2 billion people wake up every single day and do exactly the same thing. They pour a cup of coffee. It is a completely reliable, perfectly predictable morning routine. But supplying those daily cups requires a global market worth about $30 billion a year. And unlike your morning routine, that market is completely erratic. So how do we get a steady, predictable supply of caffeine out of a supply chain that is constantly swinging between extremes? To answer that, we have to look at the economics of the coffee bean. Tracing this supply chain shows us exactly how vulnerable the global systems we rely on every day actually are. Every cup of coffee begins with one of two very different plants. You can think of them as the high-maintenance star and the tough understudy. The star is Arabica. It makes up 60% of all coffee grown globally. Arabica beans produce a smooth, high-quality flavor, but the plant itself is highly sensitive. It needs high altitudes to thrive, and it reacts poorly to sudden weather changes. The understudy is Robusta. As the name suggests, it is a much tougher plant. It resists disease easily and produces a lot more beans per tree. Those beans are more bitter, but they offer a cheaper alternative when Arabica is hard to find. And where you grow these beans matters immensely. Right now, a single country controls the board. Brazil produces roughly 35% of the entire world's coffee supply. Relying on one country for over a third of global production creates a massive weak point. If a rare winter frost hits the farming regions of southern Brazil, it can kill the sensitive Arabica trees. One bad freeze can wipe out up to 30% of the entire planet's Arabica supply for the following year. Because so much of the global supply is piped into this specific region, a cold night in Brazil immediately forces the price of coffee up for every single buyer on Earth. That local weather risk is closely watched by financial traders. Hedge funds on Wall Street aggressively buy and sell coffee contracts, placing bets on whether rain will fall in Brazil or how the US dollar will perform. This chart shows the result of that intense trading. Because investors constantly react to tiny changes in weather and currency, coffee prices fluctuate wildly, routinely jumping up or down by 40 to 60% in a single year. Looking at this timeline extended out 4 years, we see a huge lag in how farmers can respond. When prices spike, farmers naturally want to cash in, so they plant more trees. But a coffee tree takes 3 to 4 years to mature. It is like turning a shower dial and waiting for the water to warm up. During that entire waiting period, the available supply stays completely flat. Then, 4 years later, all those millions of new trees finally bear fruit at the exact same time. As the updated graph shows, that sudden flood of new beans overwhelms the global market, driving the price straight down. When the price drops, farmers can no longer afford to maintain their crops, so they abandon their fields. 4 years after that, the lack of mature trees creates a global shortage. Prices shoot back up, and the wheel turns again. This biological delay traps the entire coffee industry in a constant loop of extreme highs and extreme lows. And the people who suffer the most from this cycle are the ones doing the actual growing. Globally, roughly 20 million small farm owners cultivate coffee. They are the ones forced to absorb all the damage of these massive market swings. Here is a breakdown of a standard $5 cup of coffee you might buy at a cafe. The farmer who grew the beans receives only a tiny sliver of that total, usually between 5 and 10%, or roughly 25 to 50 cents. Earning such a small margin makes the extreme price drops devastating. A farmer has to decide to plant a seed today with absolutely zero way of knowing if the harvest will pay enough to cover their costs 3 or 4 years down the road. The steady, comforting cup of coffee that starts your day is kept cheap and accessible because the farmers at the very beginning of the chain carry the burden of financial instability. Now, this highly stressed system faces a new threat. Human-driven climate change is rapidly altering the weather in traditional coffee-growing regions. The sensitive Arabica plant requires specific cool temperatures and reliable rainfall. As local climates get hotter and water becomes scarce, the exact patches of land where these beans can survive are shrinking. To find the cool air the plants need, farmers are being forced to migrate their crops higher and higher up mountain slopes. Eventually, the lower altitude farms that have grown coffee for generations become entirely useless for cultivation. Bringing a single coffee bean to your mug is an incredibly delicate balancing act. It requires surviving Brazilian weather, navigating billions of dollars in financial bets, and leaning heavily on the labor of millions of small farmers. Yet, despite all of this turbulence, the system functions at an enormous scale, successfully delivering a fresh cup to 2 billion people, morning after morning. Tomorrow, when you take that first sip, take a moment to look at your mug. You are drinking a survivor of one of the most volatile supply chains on the planet.